It's time to due diligence. Here's your host, Wiley Deason.
Welcome back to episode 2 of our second season of Due Diligence. So I just want to ask you real fast, how was your day? For those who don't know, I didn't really get to talk to my wife before we came here because our lives are busy. Imagine that. So how was your day?
My day was good.
Okay.
Teaching elementary school in December is full of excitement.
Oh, I bet.
And it's just as busy there.
It's the holiday season.
I made a calendar full of all the busy between now and the end of school. So
okay.
That helps.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you're back. I'm glad that I didn't run you off from the podcast. All right. So in our last episode, we talked about this imaginary time thief. That this time thief is really anybody or anything that distracts us from what is more important than what we should be doing. And that in order to overcome the various distractions that affect us in the home, we must reclaim our time. In this episode, we want to focus on the various seasons of life. In Ecclesiastes 3 in verse 1, Solomon tells us that there is an appointed time for everything. And there's a time or a season, depending on your translation, for every event under heaven. He then goes on to talk about some very basic and general seasons or times of life. Things like a time to give birth and a time to die, a time to weep and a time to mourn, a time to be silent and a time to speak. And he concludes his thoughts in verse 11 by saying that God has made everything appropriate in its time, in its season. Now, it's important to note that Solomon is not talking about the home, but there is a very important principle that we need to consider as we apply that principle to the home. And here it is. We are creatures of time and change. So there is a season for everything that happens in your home too. Think about it. Your home starts before you ever have a spouse, before you ever have children. At least we would hope you would have a spouse before you have children. You start out as single, you date, you get engaged, you get married, you rent your first apartment, you buy your first house, you begin your career, you get promoted, you have children, and children have different seasons of life too. They begin as infants, then they become toddlers, then preschoolers, then school-aged, and then they progress into adolescence. They then move from adolescence into adulthood. As a married couple and as parents, you have to navigate through all of these phases, and then the change doesn't stop there. Your children grow up and they leave you because kids do that kind of thing. And you are now empty nesters and then retirees. Then maybe if you're so blessed to be grandparents, you will be grandparents. And then eventually you face death. Now, this is just the natural course of life, and I think we understand that. We also understand that some people do not get to go through all of these phases. Death, for instance, is no respecter of people or no respecter of time, and it could come to any of us in any season of life. And we need to be mindful of those who are facing this time of year, the holiday season, as they are grieving over the loss of loved ones. That is another season of life, one that we all will face in some way at some time. And so that leads us to what we want to talk about first. We know that life is always changing. We know that life comes in various phases, in various stages. So I guess the question that we want to ask, and really this is for our viewers more than it is for Mallory and I, because we've already talked about these things, but do you ever find yourself worried about what's next? And when I say that, what immediately pops into your mind?
Do you mean with the word worry, or do you mean what's next?
Oh, wow. Well, it could be either or.
I think for me, when I hear it, I think that I'm not a person that worries about what's next. My dad says often that he doesn't worry, and I think maybe I tend to take after that line of thinking. But when you say what's next, the planner in me goes, all right, let's plan it.
You are a planner.
Right? I'm ready to plan it. I'm not necessarily going to worry over it, but I'm definitely ready to plan it for sure.
Okay. I think that a lot of the people that we talk about and a lot of the couples that we talk to, they are often caught off guard by the various seasons of life, as they come. It's almost as if they're just completely blindsided when a season comes. And I think we do need to admit that we don't know what's going to happen next, ever. I mean, anything could happen next. James 4 teaches us that life is like a vapor. It's here one day, it's gone the next. And so when we say things, we need to say, if the Lord wills, we will do this or that. And so there are some things that will catch us off guard. Naturally, there are some things that will surprise us, but that doesn't mean that we can't plan and be ready for the next phase that comes if, again, we are allowed to go through that phase. Solomon says in Proverbs 24, verse 3 and verse 4, that by wisdom a house is built, and by understanding it is established, and by knowledge the rooms are filled with precious and pleasant riches. That is talking about the concept of diligence as it relates to the home. And so that's an important concept for our families. And that concept goes with what we're talking about. You need to be somebody who anticipates or who thinks about the next phase of life and somebody who plans for the future. Do you have anything that you would add to that?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think too that it's all about the attitude in which you're approaching that and the attitude with which you have that anticipation. Obviously, you've referenced the worry aspect of it, which would be the negative side. But also there's that negative side too of the people that take this anticipation and say, oh, but just you wait, right?
Yeah,
There's a different thing with, oh, just you wait, and no, just you wait, right? There's a different way of looking at it. And sometimes I think that people can put that negative connotation on the next phase that's coming, for the new family that has a baby. It's, oh, just you wait until they're a toddler. And that it's not said in a great light. It's said in a negative context. And I think it's that thing of not discouraging people because we do want to anticipate what's coming next in a positive light.
Absolutely.
We don't want to view that with negativity.
Yeah. And some people, they're not necessarily caught off guard either, but they're still scared for the next phase. I think we see that especially with like empty nesters. And you see that with some of the couples we've talked to. You know how much I love statistics, obviously. So get ready, everybody. Here comes another statistic. But I want you to think about this. The divorce rate for adults 50 and older has doubled in the U.S. since 1980. And get this, the divorce rate for those 65 and older has actually tripled in our country since 1990. More than a third of all divorces come from empty nesters. And so the empty nest divorce rate is one of the highest divorce rates in our country. And that's scary for a lot of people. The empty nest syndrome, if you will, that's especially scary for parents of teenagers, because that time is coming for them a lot faster than it would be for others whose children are younger or who do not even have children yet, but hope to have children one day. And again, life changes when you have kids in the home. And because kids change so much, life changes so much from day to day. And we are constantly, you and I, we're constantly adjusting to our kids and the adjustments that they have to make, because it's just the natural course of life and growth. And so the temptation for so many people is to be so involved in the lives of their children that they forget each other as husband and wife. They forget about what comes before the children, and that's the marriage.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we referenced in the first episode that feeling of just having this enormous checklist that you're having to get through and these busy schedules and all those things. And so naturally, if this is all going on, then I shouldn't say naturally, but if all of these things are going on and you're not putting that intentional part into your life, then that distance is going to start, and all of a sudden, among that busy schedule, then all of a sudden we're just kind of going through, hey, did you do this? Hey, did you do that? And then you're drifting apart without almost even realizing it. And so I could understand how that empty nest might be something to be afraid of for people, because all of a sudden it's like, I don't know what to do with this person anymore. We've been going here and going there and doing all these things for the children that we forgot, to
about
do
each
something
other.
with each other.
I guess if I were to say anything to those who are listening or watching, just remember this: when you put your marriage or when you put your kids ahead of your marriage, that's a mistake. But when you put your marriage ahead of your kids, which is the way that it is supposed to be, think about it. That's the way that God designed it. You don't have to worry when you do that, when you put your marriage ahead of your kids, about the empty nest years and whether or not you're going to be a part of some of these statistics that we've talked about. You can actually look forward to that time. And, I'm not in any hurry for our kids to leave the house because we're having a blast. But there is a part of me that looks forward to the empty nest, because then it's kind of like, okay, we get to be just us again, at least in that role. We're still going to be parents who influence our children as they get older and things of that nature, but we'll still have more time for each other. And so that's a neat part of that phase of life. Well, that takes us to the next thing that we really want to talk about. That the Bible teaches us to face the future with confidence and optimism. We are taught to be positive people, and this idea is applied in Scripture all over the place. Paul talks about it in the New Testament, especially in Ephesians. He says, I reach forward to what lies ahead. I put the past in the past. In Philippians 4 and verse 8, he talks about thinking about things that are excellent, that are good things. And so there's that level of positivity. But it's also applied in the home in Proverbs 31, because King Lemuel, as he's talking about the things that his mother taught him about this virtual woman, as he taught about the virtuous woman, right. He said in verse 25 there of Proverbs 31, strength and dignity are her clothing, and she smiles at the future. So let me ask you this: what are you looking forward to while you are waiting? And what is exciting to you about the future of our home and our family? And why is that so important for people to think about?
I mean, if you think about it, everybody's waiting for something, and it's hard to wait. And I mean, for us right now, where we are in our family dynamic and everything that's going on, we have one that's just about to be 11 and, one that's 9 and one that's 6. And so we've got 3 that are not as needy, that they're more self-sufficient with different things.
They can buckle their own seatbelts.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, that's so great.
Which is such a good thing.
Yes.
That's not something I will ever miss, is buckling a car seat. Loved the stage, loved everything.
The best phase of life is the phase of life they're in today.
But I don't want to buckle a car seat again.
Yes, absolutely.
But it's one of those now where now you look at it and, I think that where we're at with waiting is we're in that waiting period of now they're starting to be more independent, and they're going to be taking the things that we're teaching them, but also they're learning and they're growing and they're becoming witty and they're becoming sarcastic and they're becoming more critical thinkers and things like that, specifically more with the older two. And so I think we're kind of in that waiting place of we're awaiting those teenage years, right? When there's going to be a lot that we have to work through and still be diligent in the teaching with our children, and all of that. And just, I don't know. I said that I don't worry, but whenever I think about it, I do wish there was a crystal ball sitting right here where I could, wave my hands over it and know that they're going to be making good decisions when it's time to leave our home. So I don't know. There's a lot that we're waiting on right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we look forward to things, but it's important to live today too, and to enjoy the phase. And that's why I said earlier, the best phase of life is the one we're in today. And I've felt that way always. I felt that way when the kids were small. This is the greatest phase of life. Why? Because I'm in that moment right there. And yes, those years where you're buckling kids in a seatbelt, it was pretty cute when they would say, "Dad, I love you," as you were doing that, and then give you a big hug. We don't do that when we get in the car now. It's more of a high five. You buckled your seatbelt, great. But we're even past that phase now. But those are great times. But it's important for us to look forward to the other times too, and to think about that, to talk about that. And that leads us into the third and final really thing that we want to talk about. How can we better prepare for the seasons of life that we're going to face in the home in the future? And how can we do that with diligence?
I think that, we've talked before about being proactive and not reactive. And, sometimes people can scoff a little bit at having a plan. Again, like I referenced in those early years with babies and toddlers, and people might kind of want to scoff at, oh yeah, you think you're going to do it that way, but things will change. And I don't always think that that's the right mindset to have. I think you have to be proactive in the way that you are planning, the way that you're communicating as a husband and a wife, and all of those things about what you are going to do. And I think that you have to approach it in that way, having those conversations that say, okay, we're entering into, the preteen years or the teen years. And what does that mean? What does that look like? What are the things that, we need to be thinking about, or the conversations that we know we need to have? And when are we thinking we're going to have them? Because again, I know that you've talked with people about this before, you're not just having one conversation with your children, you're having multiple conversations. And so I think that's part of being proactive, is thinking about what those are. I think there's just a lot in that realm of being proactive.
Absolutely. I think number one, it starts with observation. We learn from the successes and sometimes the failures of other people. And if I were to give any advice to anybody today, I would say, watch people who succeed. We all know how to fail. We see it every day, and we observe those things and we learn from those things, and that's important. But find somebody that you look up to who is older than you, who has been successful, no matter what phase of life they're in, and learn from that couple or that family. Learn from them about how to be successful. I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is not just observation, but anticipation. Again, we've talked about that. We need to think about these things before we get to them. And like you said, it's funny because we have not talked about how we're going to respond to these questions, and we're on the same page. And it amazes me because I know somebody who, or some people say, that you just wait. You just don't know what's going to happen in that situation. And you just wait until you get there, and then your plans will just all fall apart and all of this. And they discourage making plans. And sometimes they don't mean to. They just mean, hey, it's not going to happen the way you've planned it, or something like that. But that doesn't mean that we don't prepare. That doesn't mean that we don't have a game plan. And like any good football team, what do they do at halftime? They adjust the game plan, because if it's not working, they've got to do something else. Well, that's what we do in the home too. We adjust the game plan as we need to. And so that's important. That aspect of anticipation is absolutely crucial in our homes. And I think the third thing is communication. I think conversations like this between husbands and wives about these phases of life, like what are we looking forward to about the empty nest phase? What are we looking forward to when we have 2 in college and 1 in the home? What are we looking forward to when we have grandchildren? What kind of grandparents do we want to be? What kind of in-laws do we want to be? Things like that. I think those things are very important to talk about, to communicate. And again, observing our parents and how they're doing, observing others that are successful. That's a really important thing. Okay, so what are your final thoughts?
I think, one of my big final thoughts is speaking from the perspective of the wife and the mother. When we're talking about this, when we're talking about the various seasons, when we're talking about anticipation, when we're talking about planning, when we're talking about all of this, oftentimes what you have in the family dynamic is that the mother typically has the pulse of what's going on within the family. Maybe not always. I don't want to make a blanket statement,
Sure.
but typically
That's true.
a mother's
Yes.
going to have the pulse. And so as the mother, you have to be sure that you are able to communicate that with your husband. And it's not in a, how do you not know this kind of conversation, right? It's just acknowledging that, no, because of the role that I fulfill in the home, I do kind of have the pulse of maybe what's going on, whether it's thoughts, feelings, emotions, whatever it may be. But also, on the flip side, as the husband, and as the leader of the home, as the father figure and all of that, I think that, husbands need to be ready and willing to have that conversation, and also prompting that conversation with the wife. Because you know how I can be sometimes. Sometimes I'm ready to talk about all these things at a very inopportune time where you're not necessarily in that headspace to really talk about it. And so it's just that working together, right? Where we're communicating, but also in an effective way, which can be tricky, again, because we're busy and things like that. To do that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. As I think about my final thoughts, it was once said that the only constant in life is change. And that is so true. Change is often hard. We are creatures of time. We are creatures of change, but we are also creatures of habit. And so we get into daily routines and habits, and we don't like anything that interrupts these habits. If you don't believe me, just go into any church building in America and sit in somebody else's seat and see what happens after that. It's really interesting, by the way. But because change can happen in a very subtle way, and because it can even be happening right in front of our faces, we don't always recognize transitions as they occur. That is, until those transitions start to really interrupt our habits and our routines. And then we're often tempted to view the next phase of life pessimistically and with just great negativity. Your life does not have to be that way. Your home does not have to be that way. While we don't always know what tomorrow holds, we can still smile at the future. We can look forward to various aspects of almost every season of life, and we can be proactive. We can plan, we can anticipate, and we can prepare for the things that happen in our lives, and we can prepare for each season in the home. Here's my question for you today. What are you doing right now to prepare for tomorrow as a husband, wife, father, or mother? As you are preparing, don't forget to smile, and don't forget to enjoy every moment of your life. And make sure that you join us, by the way, for the next episode of Due Diligence as we talk about diligence in the home.
Don't forget to subscribe on all major platforms and visit our website at dudiligencepodcast.com.